Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second Abavus webinar of the day. This time we're going to take a look at transformation and digital service enablement, specifically looking at licensing processes. You've got myself, Bernie Simmons. You're going to hear mainly from me this afternoon, but I am crucially and ably assisted by a colleague of mine, Rachel Clinton. I'll explain the important role that Rachel plays in a moment. But first of all, welcome. Thanks for taking time out of what I know are busy calendars. So in terms of these webinars, I'm sure most of you now are veterans attending online events and meetings. One of the, I suppose, consequences of the whole global health pandemic that we continue to experience and have to adapt to is that we are having to have less social contact, and that's meant a great deal more in the way of online meetings for all of you, whether you're using GoToMeeting, Zoom, Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, or some other variant thereof. I'm sure you've all become something of experts in how these things work. But we've a few FAQs for these kind of one-to-many events. One of the things we always do with these is record these sessions. The reason that we do that is so that you can share them with colleagues who may not have been able to attend this afternoon. So somewhere between 24 and 48 hours after we finish up this afternoon, and we'll run for probably just shy of an hour, I would have thought. So you'll be on your way by 3:30. We will subsequently send out a link to the recording, and we'll also send you a copy of the slides that I'm using to help kind of structure the content and the narrative that we're sharing this afternoon, which will include all of the details, so on and so forth. If you like what you see and you want us to do something that's tailored for your particular local authority, we can do that. In the recent past, we would have also offered that as an on-site activity. Certainly for my own part, I've spent a lot of the last 12 years, which is the time we've been running Abavus now, trawling up and down the UK motorway network, meeting many of you face-to-face as we continue to grow our customer base. But we have historically run these things on-site. These days we're doing them mainly online, but it works pretty well. Perhaps at some point we'll get back to doing them face-to-face, which would be nice. In terms of questions, because we have generally fairly large audiences on these things, and we have this afternoon, I'm glad to say, we do mute everybody's lines. That used to be, my explanation used to be for that you often find that you will be working in an open plan office where you don't necessarily control all of the background noise or any of the background noise. The case these days is more likely you're going to be working at home, and you may have children, domestic pets, other household members barging into your workspace, potentially disrupting you. So to avoid any embarrassment or disruption, we mute everybody's lines. The one exception to that is me, of course, and I've just had a big greyhound lumber into my office and plonk himself down next to my desk, which is good company, but hopefully won't make too much noise. So anyway, lines will be muted apart from mine. That doesn't mean we don't want you to ask questions. We very much invite you to engage with us, and that is where Rachel really is, amongst other things actually, but particularly from your perspective, Rachel will be fielding questions for me this afternoon. So if you can use the chat facility on the GoToMeeting console to direct your questions, you can direct them to Rachel individually or to the entire group. It's entirely up to you, but Rachel will answer them. Sometimes those questions, or the sorts of questions that crop up, are actually more of a kind of conversation required. And if that's the kind of diagnosis, then we might ask you to kind of hold that thought, and we'll be in contact to discuss it with you offline. But Rachel will certainly do her best to answer things this afternoon, as and when they occur to you. So please use the chat facility to do that. So that's a bit of the FAQ. In terms of agenda, I'll talk briefly about background to the current challenges, introduction to my council services, just to kind of give you a level set of information, but where we sit really and what we deliver. I'll talk briefly about local authorities already using the platform. I should note there at that point, we only work with UK local authorities. We don't try and provide the My Council Service digital platform elsewhere. It's been designed and engineered exclusively for UK local authorities, and I think over the 10+ years that we've been delivering it as part of our Abavus's activities, that's proven to be a good move because it's allowed us to focus on the unique challenges and opportunities that the local authority market presents. I'll give over the majority of our time this afternoon, probably about sort of 35 minutes or so, to demonstration. One of the things we always endeavour to do is to run our demonstrations live. We do use some slides just to position things and make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page, but there's nothing like seeing technology in action to try and breathe a bit of life into it. And as a presenter of these things, sometimes you take your life in your own hands, relying on technology to work all the time, but fingers crossed things will run smoothly this afternoon. And I've talked about Q&A, use the chat facility directed at Rachel to do that, and we will do our best to help you with any questions by way of providing answers. So some folks, I know we've got a whole bunch of people on this afternoon, a small number of those were attending this morning, so apologies if you're seeing bits that I've covered off this morning in the separate session around customer self-service, but the challenges relate and resonate regardless of what you're looking at from a local authority service delivery perspective. And if you're going to put that chronologically, wind your way back to the relatively early 2000s, the onset of and release of something like Facebook in 2004, Twitter in 2005, what these technological changes did, well, they did a number of things. They changed our expectations in many ways about how we access and engage with one another as individuals, but crucially how we engage as service consumers, as customers, if you will, to our service providers. And I think it's probably in some ways leveled the expectation between commercial providers and public sector providers. Is that I don't think as consumers we make any allowance now for whether someone is a public or third sector provider or a commercial provider. We expect to be able to access through a channel that's quick and easy. That's increasingly a digital channel, and we have certain expectations around immediacy and accuracy and efficacy of response. So it does open up, and it has kind of ushered in a new era in which, if you're engaged in the business of delivering things to folk, services, products, whatever it might be, you have to take this into account, and there's no escaping it. So that's the kind of reality of the situation. Pile on top of that, if that wasn't enough of a challenge, the old news now of the financial crisis of 2007, albeit old, it's something that had a very long tail on it, and for good or ill, local authorities in particular found themselves right at the kind of leading edge of that challenge in terms of our administration at the time, our government at the time decided that was a good place to try and deliver cashable savings and reduce the public expenditure. And I make no political point in that, I'm just observing the facts. So the reality is, certainly for senior leadership in local authorities since the late noughties, early tens, and even today, that there is significant budgetary constraint. And then, if that wasn't enough to deal with, and I think in any decade, those two things are fairly significant in and of themselves. In the last 4 or 5 months, we've had to be dealing with a global health pandemic in the shape of COVID-19, which has had an impact on every single aspect of our lives, no less public service delivery. So the need to plan for social distancing measures and public health considerations. There is probably something of a silver lining, if you could call it that, in some of the impact there, in that it has, I think, in some ways acted as a bit of a catalyst to digital adoption. It's disrupted way more, and it's been negative way more than there's been any positives. But if we are, casting around looking for potential silver linings, perhaps that's one. Although I hesitate to overstate that case, but nonetheless, we have to factor it into our everyday thinking, planning, and operational activities. So there we go. A triple whammy of pretty significant challenges and changes and evolutions in their own right, let alone in combination. So I think we could all congratulate ourselves that we're still here and functioning, let alone continuing to make progress. So there we go. If I move that on specifically now to licensing services and think a little bit about the challenges and opportunities that those present. And we've been talking to, we talk to every service area pretty much within a local authority. And licensing is one of them increasingly that we're having involved conversations with. And there are, potential on the left-hand side, I've listed what you might consider challenges or potential opportunities for slip-ups. And on the right-hand side, the aspects of those service deliveries that kind of gift themselves for digitisation and that make themselves present themselves an opportunity. So if you go down the list on the left-hand side of sort of potential slip-ups and challenges, they are pretty much exclusively relatively complex processes. I mean, there are more complex processes in local authorities, but licensing has fairly broad variety of different things going on. Mostly, if you summarise it, many of those licensing type processes include multiple and crucially interdependent steps. So at a very high level, if you start to break that down, think about application processes. Within that application, you've got eligibility criteria. You often, if it's a physical asset or location that's being licensed for some purpose or other, there's often a physical inspection involved. There'll often be payment collection at some point in that process. These licenses are often things that business owners, individuals that are licensing premises and activities and so on, and assets have to pay for, and quite rightly so. There's the ongoing change in the legislative backdrop, and that certainly isn't going away anywhere soon. As we talk about the challenges to everyday life, that's having all sorts of legislative impact on us. So you have to be aware of that. And then often with these things, there's an ongoing renewal management. Sometimes the license can be short-term, a few weeks, a few months, could be just a day, and sometimes they're annual or longer term. So there's the kind of administrative renewal management side of that needs to be dealt with. So they are not straightforward, particularly when you look at them as end-to-end processes. Perhaps when you think about them just as sort of one of those, the application process as a digital contact point, they're a little less complex. But I think if you're going to do this seriously and you're going to do it effectively, you need to be thinking about them as an end-to-end process. So if we flip that around and think about the elements of licensing that kind of gift themselves and present themselves as opportunities, that in many ways they're mirrors of what I've just talked about, because licensing processes are well suited for digitisation. They're candidates for end-to-end digital enablement because they've got this aspect of multiple interdependent steps. Technology these days is such that it enables you to make a process digital from end to end. And they lend themselves for self-service. So, the ability to allow customers or enable customers and indeed encourage customers to do much of this themselves, or as much of this themselves as appropriate, is an increasing opportunity. The other thing, certainly in relation to kind of legislation down here, as things change, is the importance to have within your organisation, within the council, the ability to update and evolve digital processes, and that's enabled through configuration. So again, the technology lends itself in that regard. Historically, because of the challenges on this side of the table that we're looking at, generally these licensing services activities have been perhaps overdue for a bit of an overhaul, so they're often ripe for review and improvement. And back to our earlier kind of list of challenges, the kind of the long tail of the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, they are a welcome opportunity for councils to sustainably generate revenue and to help kind of balance the books, as it were. So I suppose in many ways, when you look at that list of potential slip-ups and areas of digitisation within licensing that gift themselves, they are to some extent a mirror of one another. I guess it depends whether your glass is half full or half empty. But nonetheless, there are opportunities to be had, hence the session we're running this afternoon. If you think about the kind of historical local government structure, it's tended to be fairly siloed in approach. So licensing, with its own complexities and challenges and resource implications, if you're responsible for licensing activities at a small, medium or large authority, you're going to be pretty focused on some fairly real challenges of service delivery, particularly given the context of the issues that we've talked about around financial constraint, customer expectations, and now kind of global health considerations. So there's a tendency when in those environments where you've got a complex set of fairly resource-intensive programs and processes to run, that you will inevitably and understandably focus in on the bit that's your job. When actually, if you're trying to drive efficiency across an organisation, you need to be looking across the organisation as a set of requirements and trying to kind of minimise the number of systems, investments, changes, processes that you're having to implement. So it's important that organisations can lift their head up out of the weeds every so often and think about how they're investing. And I think, certainly for my own part, having spent a good deal of my time over the last 12 years or so engaging with local authorities and taking them through due diligence processes as they decide to invest in the technology that we provide, you've got increasingly good at that as organisations, and pretty rapidly actually. But the challenge is that the legacy structure, where it's tended to be fairly siloed, is you end up with duplicate processes in service areas. You end up with duplicate IT systems, or at least an IT system that's different for every area, which isn't necessarily the best way to do it. And you end up with replication and potential duplication inefficiency in terms of administrative processes. And it's important to try and minimise that duplication of effort if you can, if you're going to work efficiently and use your resources to your best extent. So, how does that map to a local authority structure? Well, this is a significant distillation and simplification of the typical contemporary structure, but you will normally have, when you speak to most local authorities, some form of kind of enterprise or pan-organisational customer services function, and that will be effectively the front of house contact point. I'll talk about channels of contact in a moment, but that will be the front of house contact point for those service specific functions that we were just talking about, so be that licensing or waste or health and leisure or social care or whatever it might be. But they're an important shop window into the sort of sharp end of service delivery, and then sitting behind that, typically and alongside it, is IT, who are desperately trying to consolidate both system and data architecture to make things more accessible and be able to treat your data as increasingly a valuable asset that you can use to understand patterns of consumption and consumer behaviour and identify opportunities for organisational efficiency. So if that's a simplified model of operation for a local authority in the contemporary climate, how does our technology map to that? Well, it maps pretty much in a sort of line-by-line way. So at the top of the stack, you've got opportunities for customer self-service, so the ability to allow customers to do things themselves, and we'll look at some of that in a licensing context in a moment. You've then got, sitting alongside or directly behind that, the need for kind of, I suppose, assisted or face-to-face when that was possible, but certainly mediated and assisted these days, assistance with those processes. So that's customer relationship management and case management. And then as you start to get into the specifics of licensing in this case, how do you build solutions, digital processes that are end-to-end, that meet the particular requirements of particular service areas? And what we've done, the way that we've tackled that challenge, is to develop what we call line of business systems and modules. And they're really things actually that have a kind of horizontal flavour to them, because that you can use them in lots of different service contexts, but they enable you to do specific things, many of which are relevant to licensing for this conversation this afternoon. I think the other thing it's important to say at this stage is we're always part, where My Council Services is being deployed at a local authority, we're always part of what is sometimes a gradually decluttered, but always a sort of fairly complex stack of IT assets and systems and infrastructure. And part of our response to that is that we make sure that we can integrate well and play nicely with other systems that exist as part of your technology set up in your organisation. Another part of the sort of back office piece, and the automated workflow capability. So the ability to build automated workflow that enables processes to run without human intervention. Always a good idea if you can do it. And then speaking to that kind of data architecture, the MDM piece here relates and speaks specifically to master data management. So the ability to federate and organise your data so that you can get, for example, a 360-degree customer view and kind of really get a sense of what's going on across and through your organisation. One of the other things, and again, very pertinent in the current kind of health climate, with social distancing being a requirement, if you're going to continue to deliver local authority services, and in many cases, the organisations that folks on the line this afternoon represent are mandated to do that, and you can't get away from the fact that you have to deliver those out in the borough, out in the district, out in the unitary area. So mobile working is an increasingly important part of that, in terms of trying to minimise social contacts and paper trails and so on and so forth. The equipment that's used is digital devices and so on. So that's an important part of mobile working. And the idea being that you can try and kind of automate those processes end to end. And you automate them in many cases by using automation. And My Council Services comes with a built-in rules engine as part of that. The other thing, and it speaks to some of my comments a little bit earlier, is to remember that you've got customers at the centre of all these things. Or many of these things, probably 95% of the time, a process that's running in a local authority at any stage of that kind of organisational structure has probably got a customer attached to it somewhere, someone that's consuming a service, needs a service, wants a service, has a problem that you may be able to help them resolve. And it's probably quite a good idea to keep those customers updated and keep them appraised of feedback and progress to their particular concern or service request. So the idea being that you could potentially, someone could submit a request for whatever it might be, a licensing application, for example, in the morning via their tablet. That could go through an automated process it may be viewed or eyeballed by someone in customer services or someone in a licensing specific function, and then it may end up out on the tablet of an inspector of some description to go and conduct an inspection and award or otherwise that license application. So it's the idea of being able to, to identify those opportunities for automation throughout the process, and as I said earlier, build end-to-end digital processes if that's possible and appropriate. If I just explode out a few of the components that make up a solution and would typically enable something that encompasses something like licensing in a local authority, you're probably at the customer contact end going to be using the eForm designer as part of My Council Services. You may also be enabling customers to access those eForms via the suite of native mobile applications that we provide, or you may indeed, as I will show you in a moment, be providing access for customers via an enterprise account interface. And you can have any or all of those, and you can kind of tighten them up in terms of validation and access and registration in lots of different ways. If I drop down a level and we kind of look at the modules, integration, automation components, and I've just highlighted in blue the bits that we're going to at least touch on this afternoon. So you've got things like service desk that I mentioned earlier, which is our case management capability. Contact center, we probably won't look at that this afternoon. We looked at that in this morning's webinar. But we'll certainly kind of take a look at licensed contract manager. We may look at some scheduling and appointments opportunities as part of the licensing piece. And then we'll certainly try and show you some examples of the rules engine kicking in. So what we've done really in terms of our approach with enabling the back office and the sort of enabling digitisation, automation all the way through the process is to build out, as I mentioned earlier, these kind of modules and line of business capabilities that allow you to build service area specific processes whilst the modules themselves have relevance across multiple different service areas across the council. And that's proven to be a pretty effective approach so far, because it means you can invest in something like our schedulings and bookings and appointments engine once, but actually use it in lots of different service scenarios, not just licensing, for example. We'll also, time allowing and technology allowing, take a quick look at some of the mobile worker functions, but that's really the ability to get a job or an issue out onto someone's tablet or laptop or smartphone even potentially, that can then go and do something remotely, both working online and offline, and that has lots of implications and is very much a sort of the link that closes the loop that allows you to bring a full digital process into existence and into practice. So that's a quick walk through some of the kind of modules and the general structure of My Council Services. I'll just pop up on screen a list of 25 recent projects that we've done. These don't all relate to licensing. They've been used across this list of councils in lots of different ways. That represents probably just under half of our current customer base. We're, I think, about 53 UK local authorities we work with currently in lots of different ways and shapes and forms. Some of those are enterprise customers where it's used kind of pretty much end to end across a wide array of service areas. Sometimes we start in a particular area where we're enabling just a particular function. But as I said earlier, we'll share these slides with you and you can review these at your leisure, so I won't read them back to you. So hopefully that helps in terms of at least sort of 15 to 20 minutes of introduction, just to sort of give you a sense of, if you're not familiar with us already, who we are, but perhaps more importantly, what it is that we do and how we go about it and how that fits together. So what I'll try and do now is spend a bit of time over the next 20-30 minutes giving you a bit of a sense of how that technology actually works. So I'm just going to jump out of the slides, get rid of my scribbles, and we'll jump across to a browser interface and we'll start to run some processes and some live technology. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've gone to a browser. I'm going to log in as a pretend customer. Let's see if I can remember my pretend customer's password. And then log in. So I'm logging into a portal at this point. Apparently I can't, oh, my session's expired, so it's timed out. Standard security setting. I'd had that browser window open for more than 5 minutes. You could set that as a setting in the back office and then timed out. So I need to refresh it and log in again. try that again. So when we deliver My Council services for a customer, we're always doing that as an integrated and branded and seamless component of the web property, the .gov.uk property that your organisation will be responsible for, and the shop window that it presents digitally to the world. So one of the differences of running these sorts of events or this sorts of activity is that we're running this in an isolated environment. I'm showing it to you as a portal, as a fully configured portal for which the customer has to register. That is not necessarily the case in terms of the way that all of our customers use My Council services. If you invest in the kind of e-forms and kind of front of house piece of the solution, you get the ability to do individual e-forms that require no registration, so a customer can just bowl up to your web property and start using a My Council services e-form, without any knowledge that that's necessarily what they're doing. Be on your generic .gov.uk web property using one of our forms that's a fully integrated component. You can have individual forms that require registration if you wish, and you can have a portal, as the example that we're showing this afternoon is, where you've got a kind of a complete environment that includes all of the features and functions of the platform, and that's how we choose to demo this in this context. So having introduced what we're looking at, let me just kind of try and give you a bit of a tour of the screen real estate. You've got a left-hand sidebar on the left-hand side here, perhaps not surprisingly, which is fully configurable. And I think that's one of the key aspects of My Council services as a platform, is that it's very much been designed as a configurable environment. And we talked about the importance of a configuration in the licensing context a few minutes ago. In that, as things change, you are going to want to kind of evolve and change the way things are presented to your customers, the way that a process has to work. So configuration is kind of the golden thread that runs through the My Council services platform. So on the left-hand side, you've got a configurable toolbar. If I click on something like Apply for It, for example, not surprisingly, you've got a whole bunch of different options in there. So in a moment, we're going to go and take a look at the HMO House of Multiple Occupancy Licenses, a sort of fairly complex example, and then we'll look at a couple of other variations. If I go into Book It, you can see that there's a selection of booking options. So the idea is that although we're here to discuss and share examples of how licensing services can use My Council services, you can probably already start to see that actually there are lots of other service area scenarios that can just as equally well make use of the sorts of functionality that licensing would want to use. So that's your left-hand sidebar. If I take you back to the home screen, you can see that we've got some hot spots, or widgets as we call them, in the center of the screen. Again, they're configurable. You can turn them on, you can turn them off. You can have 1, 3, 6, however many you want in there. You've got a search bar at the top, and then on the right-hand side, you've got a bunch of effectively hooks into third-party and My Council services data. So top of that, you've got a list of effectively management information that the customer can access about their interactions and transactions with the council, and then you've got various kind of webhooks into third-party applications and third-party data sources. We're not going to be looking at those this afternoon, but I just thought I'd mention them. So if we wanted to go and start doing some actual transactional work, I mentioned a second ago that there's a search bar at the top, and the whole platform and the whole portal in particular is optimized and indexed for search. So I've just typed in HMO there, the acronym, or the commonly used acronym for houses in multiple occupation, and that has very quickly pulled back any content in the portal that's relevant to that. And in this case, that's pulling back the HMO application form. I could, of course, have gone to Apply for It, identified the form, and then clicked on the form link, but this is a quicker way to get there. So the whole thing is about trying to minimize the number of clicks and the pathway for customers to get to the content that they need. So I'm going to show you this one first of all, and I'm doing it first very deliberately, and I'm doing that deliberately because it's actually quite a long and involved form. So any of you that are familiar with the HMO application process will be familiar, and understandably, because of the nature of the application, it's quite an involved piece of legislation. It's an involved application process and can be fairly expensive for landlords to apply for, and therefore it needs to be a sort of robust application and management process. So I'm going to whistle through this fairly quickly, though. We've opened the form up with some some basic guidance and documentation around an example. The first thing that we asked for, what I am going to do is I'm going to cut every corner possible in this process, just to kind of save a bit of time. But I did want to show you kind of a longer, more involved form. And you can see that we've got a breadcrumb trail across the top. That will gradually expand out because this is quite a lengthy form. But I'm going to whistle through it as quickly as I can. So I'll select an address that I want to register. You'll notice at that point that we are linking to the address space, the NLPG, National Land and Property Gazetteer. So that will sync in terms of UPRNs, unique property reference numbers for this address with your council's instance of LLPG, the Local Land and Property Gazetteer, as we go through the process. So I've put the address in, the type of application that I'm making. I'm going to say I'm doing a new application, but we could go down the renewal branch at this point. I mentioned that need to manage these processes often on an annual basis or whatever frequency is required. I'm logged in as a customer, a registered customer here, a fictitious resident of Redbridge Borough Council, made up Gary Cox. And what we're doing, because Gary's a registered customer and is known to the council, we're able to pull back some of that information and also populate some of those details. So we'll put in a few, but I'm going to skip over most of them. We'll make Gary a birthday in 68, and we'll say he was born today, so today's his birthday. Company, if applicable. Again, I'm just saving time. I'm going to skip through an awful lot of these, but this is one of those forms that, typically someone applying for it online would have to spend some time completing. And to that end, you could then allow the customer, as they're working through it, to save and submit later. So as a registered customer, then they can go through a process of actually starting that process, completing part of that application, and then come back to it later when perhaps they've got all the information at hand or whatever it might be. Again, I'm skipping through what is quite a detailed form. We've got a fair ways to go yet. We'll say no, there's no leasehold within the property, just keep things simple. But you can see, for any of you that are familiar with the HMO application, so there's quite a bit of detail in here. I've deliberately made the vast majority of these forms and the questions on these forms non-mandatory. You can, of course, make every field mandatory if you want to and if you need to, but it's just in the interest of time, and I didn't want to spend 20 minutes working through the form with you. We'll probably do it in 7 or 8 minutes. I've made them non-mandatory so that I can skip through and avoid lots of form filling. But I just want to demonstrate the potential complexity of what you've got here. So we'll skip over those. I think we'll skip over that as well. The bed sitting. And I'll put some details in here. So we know we've completed it. We get into quite a lot of detail, as they rightly should. So I'm also demonstrating the kind of range of field types that you can capture data through. So you can have this done free text, you can have a drop-down menu. We'll copy and paste that. Station, we'll say no there. We'll skip on. Well, these would normally all be mandatory questions. I just want to fill in some of the details so that when we go to look at the case in the back office, you'll get a good sense of the fact that we have actually completed a form. So we're rapidly approaching the end, having whistled through the first 10 or 12 steps. We can then update and add any documentary evidence that we're required to do, so we'll go and do that. Again, just a way of demonstrating the capability. So we'll have a safety HMO certificate uploaded. You can control the file extensions that are permissible. You can control the number of documents that are uploaded, the size of those documents individually or cumulatively. And then the final piece that we need to do is just sign a declaration effectively, and then click on next, and we'll then get a summary of all of the information that we've submitted. So a couple of things that I suppose reflect the reality of the situation, the length of that form, it's quite a long form, and then a couple of things that don't reflect the reality of that situation, the speed with which I've gone through it, and the fact that I've allowed myself to skip a whole bunch of important detail. And the reason that I've done that is I then wanted to take you through to the sort of next stage, which is the payment for it. So we've very deliberately designed this HMO application process to replicate the real HMO form so that we can demonstrate the ability for the platform to handle long and relatively complex forms or relatively long forms. And then we're also going through the fee collection stage at this phase. You wouldn't necessarily have to do that if you were deploying this as a real-life process. You might choose as a council to take the application in-house first, have that looked at by a licensing professional that's got experience of licensing houses of multiple occupancy, and then choose to collect the fee. And you can quite easily dislocate those two things. So it's really for the purposes of the demonstration, really, that I've gone ahead and done that I've got the payment piece tethered to this. But you could quite easily have a process that says, well, here's your application form. That will then sit as pending until we've checked it. Once it's then been checked, we'll then fire you a notification back that then gives you the ability to access a separate form that allows you to pay for the correct fee for the HMO application that you've made. So the fact that we're doing it all in one step here is really just to demonstrate the art of the possible. So we've calculated the fee, which is a single lettable premise for an HMO license. You can add multiple rows if you're adding multiples. So you can really, and this is an interface between both the eForm capability and also the products module within the Mail Council Services platform. So we also offer, as part of the kind of online payments capability, a products module. If I then click on next, and it accepts that fee calculation, we're at our first point of integration, if you will, with a third-party application. And what we're doing here is integrating into and interacting with a payment card industry compliant payment gateway. So we just use Barclaycard because they offer an easily accessible test version. We've done an awful lot of integration into different flavors of payment gateway. So Capita is a popular one within local authorities, as is Civica, as is WorldPay. We've also done quite a bit in terms of integration for direct debits. So we've done Go Cardless and Bottom Line, both of which are direct debit capabilities in the same space. So we can do kind of all manner of payment collection. We'll put in a made-up card number. That's 4 and 15 ones if you fancy giving it a whirl on Amazon. I don't think it will work, but you're welcome to try. Put in our made-up CVC number, and then we can allow that process to go through. Once it's done that payment, it will automatically and seamlessly hand the customer back to the payment page to tell them that payment's been accepted. If that payment had failed and your payment gateway provider is enabled to do so, you could have repeat attempts with a different card or whatever the outcome might be. So at that point, the HMO application has been completed in inverted commas, and we've made the appropriate payment for that application using a credit card. So all of that has been done in theory at this stage by the customer, the applicant themselves, without the need for intervention. As I mentioned, as kind of a quick injection of sort of reality or process design, you may want to dislocate those two things and conduct the inspection and check the application. All of that is possible. We've just bundled that all together in a single step for the purposes of having an hour to share some of these details with you this afternoon. So then click on next. That will confirm everything, having done a successful payment. The customer, the applicant, can then review their application, including documents that they've uploaded, the location of the premises that they're wanting to license in the capacity of a house of multiple occupancy, and assuming that they're happy with all of that, then they can go ahead and submit that. And as I mentioned earlier, there's the option throughout to enable an applicant to save and submit later, and there's an area where they can go, as you can see here, where I'm hovering my mouse, of draft service request. So if you save something and want to go back to it later, that's one of the benefits of being a registered customer. So that's a fairly lengthy application process in the arena of housing and multiple occupancy for licensing. And there are lots of fairly lengthy examples of licensing type applications. So what we'll do is we're going to do a couple of things that are a little bit quicker now. So I'll go this time to apply for it again, and we'll try a temporary event notice. So again, you're going to notice a variation on a classical theme at this point. A little bit of preamble and a breadcrumb trail across the top. We've set this up for an example from Lambeth, just for the purposes of a demonstration. Lambeth, to be clear, are not a customer of ours. This is just an example that we've created. So we'll say yes. That goes and then says we confirm that we've read the notes of guidance. I'll say yes, it's going to be within 10 days. I'll say yes, I've got a current personal license. You can build interdependencies in these processes. So if someone said no, you could terminate that process and take them directly to the personal license application piece, and so on. And then we'll click on next. And again, I'll whistle through this form and use my artistic license just to get through it fairly quickly. So we'll put in Gary's top preferred title. We'll say no. I'll put in a date of birth. I can't remember what we gave him. I think it was 1968. So we'll do that again. This is a mandatory field, so I'd better complete it. And we'll make today his birthday. Place of birth, we'll say London. National insurance number. Again, these are all validation. So you need to put something in that's the right format. We'll go. I've got a limited memory for postcodes, so we'll go with the postcode, get that checked back. Yes. On we go. Okay. We could constrain this to be only certain addresses in certain locations. And then on to licensable activities, we'll say no. We'll keep this nice and simple. No, no, no. It's going to be a fairly tame event. We can do multiple applications for multiple dates if we wish. Quick confirmation of the personal license, we'll say yes. I'll say Lambeth in this example. I'll say no, no. So we've got some radio buttons to capture data on previous events. What have I missed? There we go. And then we're through to confirmation. Again, it's a familiar pattern in this example. And once again, we can go and make a payment. So that payment gateway integration has been done once as an activity to integrate it between my council services, in this case Barclaycard, but it can be used for multiple different purposes. So that sits as a plugin on the platform. We'll give it an expiry date again. And confirm my payment. And that will complete the second process. And then we can go ahead and we can submit that application. I'm going to show you one more example. It's stretching the boundaries a little bit of what you might consider licensing, but I just wanted to show you a bookings example. And this is a very quick example for booking a market stall. Again, it's an example that we've built just to demonstrate the point and the art of the possible. So if you're looking to do bookings for licensed activities, this is an example from booking a market stall pitch. So it gives some examples actually from a location in Lincolnshire in this example that we've just picked as a demonstration example. So that gives a list of the market locations and then gives a bookings capability as part of that. So that's using the bookings plugin. So this is about building in the kind of sophistication into a process. So we can either look at all of the different locations, whether it be Holbeach or Long Sutton or Spalding Market, or we can just take an interest in a particular location. So we might want to look at Spalding, for example, and just search on that and see when the dates are available. So we get all of the Spalding dates. We may then be a casual stall holder, in which case we can select one of those, or we may be a regular store holder. So this is again is using both the eForms capability and the plugin capability for bookings in this example. And we can get a regular store, which has got a cost associated with it. We can request an electrical hookup and a water supply as part of that. And what it's doing while it does that is it's adding the cost up for us. So it's using the product's capability to build up that booking for us. So we're booking a regular stall. I'll click on book and it will write that back into the transaction. And again, we go through to the payment phase. So it's reusing that integration to the payment gateway as a plugin so that you build it once, that integration, and you use it multiple times so that you can really juice the value out of it. And we'll give it an expiry date again. And click on next. And then we go ahead and we submit. So that's a quick bookings example. As I said, it's a tiny bit outside of the realms of traditional kind of licensing activity, but certainly market trading is a licensable activity in the UK, and therefore the bookings of that would often fall under licensing application. But I just want to show you a bookings example alongside some of the longer form examples that I've been sharing over the last few minutes. So we'll take a slight change of tempo at that point, and what I want to do next is take a look at how you make some of this remote from a mobile working perspective, and to start to get a sense of kind of an inspections capability. So what I'm going to do with at that stage is just share the screen of my tablet device, and to do that, I need to just use a little bit of third-party technology, which I'll fire up now, and that should enable me to show you the screen of my Android tablet. If I allow that to happen, and then I'll drag that across onto the main screen for you so you can see that as well. So you're looking at my Android Galaxy 5 tablet that I'm holding, and it's in a ruggedized case at my end, so it could quite easily be out being used by a mobile worker, for example. And what I want to draw your attention to is this MCS demo icon at the bottom of the screen, because it's effectively the portal that we've been using. It's effectively the native app version of that portal. So, for example, any of the forms that we were using in that apply for it section, blue badge, temporary event notice, HMO license, they're all available as part of the native mobile application. So if a customer wants to download the app from the relevant app store and use it, they can. But also, and crucially, and this is kind of really why I wanted to show it to you and share it with you this afternoon, is there's a couple of options on here. That if you're an officer of the council, a licensing officer perhaps, and you're responsible for going out and doing inspections, so when you download the app and you log in under your council profile, you will have access to a different set of functionality than that which a member of the public would have. So you might have, for example, the mobile worker icon available to you, as I have here, and you may also have, as I have here, access to a set of inspection forms. I'll just show you a couple of quick examples on that. So if you're out in the borough now and you're conducting inspections, and we'll choose something that's fairly quick. We've done a couple of long form examples with the HM application and the temporary event notice, but if I want to conduct an ad hoc inspection of a taxi on rank, I can use my native mobile application with my inspection form loaded to do exactly that. So I can go and I can put in the driver's badge number, I can put in the reg, any other information. We'll say, are there any other issues? We'll say no. Obviously, if you entered it, yes, you'd have an opportunity to list those. Does the driver have an issue that they would like to raise? We'll say no in this example, so we'll keep it fairly simple. We can take photographic evidence, so I could take a photo with the camera, or I could select from the library. So I'll choose one selected from the library. And then if I'm completed with that inspection, that ad hoc inspection of a taxi on the rank, as an inspector, then I've completed that, and I've done that without the need for any paper. It's fully digitized in that regard, and that will then exist in the back office, which is somewhere we'll go and have a look at in a moment in terms of that inspection being completed. So it's been submitted to the appropriate authority. Click on OK, and that then takes us back to the app. So it's the native mobile application extends the platform that is My Council Services in multiple different directions. It enables customers to have an alternate way of using it, and crucially, it enables mobile workers to use it, council officers or contracted third parties for the council to use it for inspection purposes or whatever else it might be. I'm also going to draw your attention to the mobile worker icon here, because whilst we've been working away on those various other processes, something that's been going on in the background is that HMO application form that Gary Wilcox, my pretend customer, created on the portal about 5 or 10 minutes ago now, has been subject to an automated set of workflow that says, well, there's an inspection due on that application process. He's paid his fee, he's completed his form satisfactorily, we'll assume for the time being, and we've now assigned it out for an actual inspection. So whoever that's been assigned to, whichever licensing officer, that's housing licensing officer that's been assigned to, now has that on their device, and they can see all of the details that Gary either did or didn't complete on that. As we know, that's quite a long form, but you have that full digital access to that full digital form available to you on your device. And what it will do when it stops syncing, I've just asked it to sync again, which I shouldn't really have done. That was a mistake. I can actually scroll through the entire thing, and I could then have that form loaded on here as an inspection form and actually complete an inspection based on that application. So if I want to do that, I can jump back and we'll look at tasks, and I've got corresponding to that service request, I've now got an HMO inspection task also assigned to me. That could have gone off to a different officer, or it could have gone off to a member of my team if I had an inspection team, but I can then go into that task and I can actually access what is a pre-configured task form. So it's using the e-form capability of the platform to go in and to enable a complete end-to-end digital process. So it's allowing the application process to be digitized. It's allowing the management of that through the back office process to be automated through the rules engine, and it's assigning those tasks out and those activities out to a licensing officer in that context. I'm not going to subject you to some more of my form filling, but hopefully the concept of this is pretty clear in terms of being able to digitize the entire process. And the beauty of the native mobile application is that it enables the licensing officer, or whoever it happens to be, to work both online and offline. So you don't have to have full mobile signal. You're not caching anything in the browser because you're able to work within the native mobile application. It's holding data encrypted securely locally on the device whilst that's being used, and once that task is completed, so that data is scrubbed from the device. So it makes things much more complete in terms of end-to-end processes. I'm very conscious of time. We're coming 24 minutes past the hour, and I did promise I'd have you on your way by 1/2 past. So what I want to do is just take a very quick dip into the back office of My Council Services. So I'm going to refresh my screen, and what we've done here, I'm in a different browser interface, and I'm looking at the back office of My Council Services. So the first part, when we were looking at the portal, that was everything that a customer would do. And now we're looking at, we then looked at some of the mobile working capability using the native mobile application. And now what we're going to do is take a look at some of the back office capability. And I'm looking at an application called Service Desk. And Service Desk is really a kind of a service-oriented view of the world, in as much as it gives the user, within their privilege set, within their set of authorizations as a user of the platform, access to the data that's relevant to their job role. So it's quite tightly constrained. There's a module on My Council Services that's an underpinning element of the platform called RBAC, Role-Based Access Control, and that allows you as a council to govern the privilege set and the visibility set, both of functionality and of data that all users on that platform have. So if I'm in the licensing department or the licensing team, I'll be able to view all of the licensing information. And one of the things that we can see there, if you look at the Service Desk view of things, is that taxi rank vehicle inspection that was completed at 1520 was available was created by an inspector remotely out on the rank using the native mobile application. The temporary event notice that was submitted by my pretend customer Gary Wilcox for 58 Grove Hill is available in there, and the HMO application at the same address is also available out in the back office to be viewed. So I've got the ability within all of these things to manage them in any way that I see fit. So if I drop into the HMO application, for example, you can see all of the relevant detail of that particular application set, all of the detail that Gary created, the forms that he uploaded, and the location of that. And you can see that the task that was created that was then automatically assigned out to me as a mobile worker that I could view on the device, and any other context alongside that. And on the right-hand side of Service Desk, when I drop into the detail of a case of a service request, I've got the ability to manage that in any particular way that I want to. I can add or create a document, I can add a note, an interaction, I can create a task from here. So you can case manage these things in a manual way by intervening as a user of the platform, and you can have these things done automatically by way of the rules set, the rules engine that exists on the platform. So we've covered quite a lot of ground, and we've done a number of different things. What I want to try and do to kind of finish up with is just take you through a couple of final areas. The next area I'd like to go and take a look at is the administration functions. I'm not going to go into huge detail here because we're fairly constrained in time, but in the administration screens of My Council Services, what you've got really is the ability to configure the platform and configure processes on the platform in any way that you see fit. So you can build a form from scratch, for example. You can access a form through the form store, and that can includes all of the forms that I've showed you this afternoon, both application forms, both task-based forms, inspection forms for mobile workers, whatever it might be. You can configure the way that both the native mobile applications and the portal look. And if I look for something like plugins, I've mentioned this a few times. In every process that we've run this afternoon, both the HMO application, the temporary event notice, the market stall booking, we've used payment as part of that process. And I've mentioned a few times that payment integration is a integration project. We're having to tether technically and securely two separate applications together. Those two applications are My Council Services and the payment gateway provider that you use. But once we do that piece of work with you, that then exists as a plugin, and that can be called into any other form. So the idea is configuration to enable you to build processes, and reusability of components such as plugins, so that you can make use of these things on a repeatable basis. And that's really where the magic is, if you will, within the administration area of the platform. Those that are responsible for configuring and setting up the platform for you and with you as part of the council and with our help and support can do pretty much anything you need to do. So for licensing, for example, as legislation changes, as things move on, you can make those necessary changes if it means there's an implication to the way the process is going to run. The very final area that I want to finish up with, if I can, folks, is just to give you a very quick glimpse of some of the reporting capabilities. There's some very sort of basic dashboard reporting in terms of applications. So if we were to look and slice that to go and look at licensing activities across all forms, then you can see by day, by week, by month, by application type, all of the details that are going through. So you've got the ability to look at both service requests, both customers and statistics. which is channel of access primarily for stats, and customers, as the name suggests, is customers. And then if I take your attention down to the analytics view of this, we can get some more detailed forms. One of the things that's certainly relevant from a finance point of view, from a licensing point of view, is some of those financing reports. But the analytics section allows you to build much more granular reports. There's a whole suite of pre-configured reports that you can see on screen currently. If I just pop into one of those, and I want to look at payment reconciliation for the Barclaycard payment gateway, and I want to look at licensing and how much revenue we've taken through that over the past month, I can very quickly get a granular and atomic view of all of the licensing applications that have been successfully processed and paid for over the last month. So as well as that ability to create that data, because you've got a digital breadcrumb trail of everything that's been done, you've got the ability within My Council Services to investigate that and to interrogate that from a reporting and analysis perspective. So that's a very kind of quick run through a whole bunch of processes that relate to licensing. Some are more complex and long-winded than others, but it gives you kind of hopefully a sense of the art of the possible. And what I'll do just in the last minute is just give you a little bit of kind of advice to get started, really, from our perspective. From 12 years of delivering projects for local authorities, there's a few things that we've learned. This is something of a distillation of those. But one of the things that we see a lot is that councils, whilst they have a broad requirement for transformation and the use of digital technology across their organisation, it's often a good idea to break your project up into phases. And by that, we say, well, think about implementing My Council Services incrementally. Start with a certain area, with a certain set of processes, and build out from there. And the purpose and benefits of that is it allows you to start with some fairly quick tactical wins whilst building a continued and stronger business case for the longer-term strategic goals. I've talked about integration quite a lot. We've talked about the ability to integrate into payment gateways, and I've shown you a few examples of that. But we can also integrate with a range of other systems, be that housing management system or whatever it happens to be. So My Council Services is open and it can be integrated with, and we'd certainly suggest that you consider integration as part of an implementation, but consider them carefully. And then the final thing we say, I think just to temper our own enthusiasm, is that technology is only part of the solution. A really important part of what we do in the implementation programs that we run with our customers is what we call a kind of process mapping exercise. So that's really the ability to kind of break down and identify processes and look for opportunities for making them more streamlined, making them easier for customers to use, making them easier for you to administer. If you just take offline processes and simply roll them over into a digital form, it doesn't necessarily give you the best solution. So the technology is important and it's the enabler, but it's only part of the solution. That program planning and that process mapping is also an important part of what you'll need to be considering. So we've covered quite a lot of ground in the last hour. I hope that's been useful for you and given you a bit of an insight into what can be done from a licensing perspective. You'll no doubt have questions, and if you want to get in touch with us, our contact details are on screen currently. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for participating this afternoon. I hope that's been useful and wish you a productive remainder of your Tuesday and the rest of the week. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye for now.